If you're a book character, which one would you be? I don't know, Agnes, if she wanted to make out with Pierre Anton. She said before that she thought about climbing up the plum tree and joining him. And I found that very relatable. Yeah, probably in chapter 1. Well, it can't be chapter 1 because chapter 1 is like one sentence. Chapter 2 then. I want a cool nickname like the kids give each other. I thought plum trees were small. Yeah, they can be. Like, enough for, like, a kid to climb up in it. Yeah. Like so. Sorry it's so fucking reflective. Right? Sorry, I have to burp again. He was whining already on Friday while we were clearing up. And Otto telling him to shut up didn't help. I'll snitch, Jan Johan replied. Everything went quiet. You're not going to snitch, Sophie said coldly. But Jan Johan was having none of it. I'll snitch, he repeated. I'll snitch, I'll snitch, I'll snitch, he kept saying, like a song with no tune. Jan Johan was going to snitch and say that the story we'd worked out for him to tell his parents was all lies. That it wasn't true at all that he'd just found his father's missing knife and happened to cut his finger off when he yanked the knife out of a wooden post it had been stuck in. All his whining was more than anyone could stand. So Otto yelled that Jan Johan could shut his trap or else get beaten up on. Not even that helped. So Otto was forced to beat up on Jan Johan. But that just turned his whining into loud bawling. Until Richard and Dennis took hold of Otto and said enough was enough. So we sent Jan Johan off home and told him to come back the next day at 1 o'clock. If you don't turn up, we'll beat you up all over again, Otto yelled after him. No, said Sophie, shaking her head. If you don't turn up, we're going to take the whole hand. We glanced around at one another. None of us was in any doubt that Sophie meant what she was saying. Not least Jan Johan. He bowed his head and ran as fast as he could down the road and away from the sawmill. Saturday, at 10 minutes before 1, Jan Johan came back. This time he wasn't running. He came walking, slowly, staggering almost, in the direction of the sawmill. I know because Otto and I were waiting at the end of the road. We're standing at the end of the road, waiting, shivering in an icy wind with our hands buried deep in our pockets, ready to go fetch him if he didn't show up of his own accord. Jan Johan began whining as soon as he saw us. I recalled Sophie's thin-lipped silence, back then with the innocents, and told Jan Johan to shut his mouth and pull himself together. Crybaby. Crybaby, scaredy cat. Jana Johanna. It didn't help. Jan Johan's whining only got worse. When we got back to the sawmill and he saw the knife sticking up out of the plank that had been laid across the sawhorses, where his finger was going to be guillotined. It was Lady William who provided us with this magnificent word for what was going to happen. Thank you, Lady William, for the guillotine. Or the guillotine, however you care to pronounce it. It was Lady William who provided us with this magnificent word for what was going to happen. Jan Johan couldn't care less. He was howling absurdly at the top of his voice. And it was impossible to understand the sounds that were short of becoming words in his mouth. Sorry, I really like the way the books are written, so when I mess up a word, it's really hard for me to not start the sentence over. He was howling absurdly at the top of his voice, and it was impossible to understand the sounds that were stopping short of becoming words in his mouth. One thing that we did comprehend, though. "Mom! Mom!" he wailed. "Mommy!" Jan Johan threw himself down into the sawdust and rolled around with his hands between his legs. And it hadn't even started yet. It was pathetic. Crybaby, scaredy cat. Jana Johanna. No, it was worse than pathetic, because Jan Johan was the class leader and could play guitar and sing Beatles songs. But all of a sudden, he'd become a howling little baby. You just wanted to kick. One Jan Johan had become another Jan Johan, and we didn't care for this one. I thought maybe it had been this one Sophie had seen that night with the innocents. Except that time it had been him on top. And suddenly I got shivers down my spine, thinking about how many different people one and the same person can be. Strong and feeble, noble and mean, brave and cowardly. There was no fathoming it. It's young Johan. I don't care. It's 1:00, Sophie announced, interrupting my train of thought. Probably just as well, because I no longer felt sure where we were headed. Like young lean. It's Swedish. Okay, fine. It's 1:00, Sophie announced, interrupting my train of thought. Probably just as well, because I no longer felt sure where we were headed. Jan Johan let out a long, wailing sound and started rolling around in the sawdust with no thought for Ursula Marie and me having raked it all so neat. Elise, Rosa, and Frederick, go outside and keep watch, and make sure no one else comes close enough to hear anything. Sophie continued, unmoved. The door closed behind the three of them, and Sophie turned to Otto and Huge Hans. Now it's your turn. Jan Johan leapt to his feet and threw his arms around a post, and Otto and Huge Hans had to work hard to make him let go again. And then Richard and Holy Carl had to help drag him away, with him thrashing about so. Sometimes when I'm reading this, I feel like I'm Agnes confessing to like a police report or something. I'm like, and then Huge Hans lifted him up and brought him over. Huge Hans held him down. I just watched. And then Richard and Holy Carl had to help drag him away, with him thrashing about so. Oh, he's pissing himself, Richard exclaimed suddenly. And it was true. Gerda giggled. The rest of us watched in disgust as a dark, uneven stream appeared in the sawdust. Jan Johan was still twisting and writhing when they got him over to the sawhorse. To the sawhorses. Huge Hans had to sit right down on top of his stomach. That helped, but Jan Johan's fists were still clenched, and he was refusing to open them despite rather convincing physical arguments put forward by Otto and Huge Hans. Guy who's been here for like 5 minutes of the entire book. What's with the pissing fixation? Shut up, nerd. You're a fucking idiot. Go watch TV, loser. Okay, I'm sorry. There's like 2 piss scenes in the whole book. One was a dog, and this kid's about to get his finger chopped off. He's like, wow, this seems like a kink. We're on page 147. Okay, anyways. I'm not trying to tear India, I'm sorry. It's comic relief. Jan Johan was still twisting and writhing when they got him over to the sawhorses. Huge Hans had to sit right down on top of his stomach. That helped, but his fists were still clenched, and he refused to open them, despite some convincing physical arguments. If you don't put your finger on the block, we're just going to have to cut it off where you are, Sophie said calmly. There was something eerie about how calm she was. Nevertheless, it was like it was rubbing off on the rest of us. What was to happen was a necessary sacrifice in our struggle for the meaning. We all had to do our bit. We had done ours. Now it was Jan Johann's turn. It's not like it was that bad. When Jan Johann again let out a loud wail, Hussein lifted up his arm that had just had its plaster cast removed and said, "There's nothing to be afraid of. It's only a finger." "Right, it's not going to kill you," said Huge Hans, from on top of Jan Johann's stomach, and forced Jan Johann's right hand open. "And if it didn't hurt," Anna-Lee said quietly, "if it didn't hurt, there wouldn't be any meaning to it." The knife grated deep into Jan Johann's finger with a suddenness that made me gasp. I looked up at my green wedge sandals and took a deep breath. For a second, everything was quiet. Then Jan Johann screamed louder than I'd ever heard anyone scream before. I covered my ears, and it was still unbearable. Four times, Sophie had to go at it with the knife. With Jan Johann thrashing around so much, she had a job getting a clean cut. The third and fourth times I watched. It was actually quite fascinating to see how the finger turned into threads and stumps of bone. Then everything was blood, and it was just as well Pretty Rosa had been sent outside, because there was lots of it. It took an age, and then it was over. Sophie slowly got to her feet, wiped the knife with a handful of sawdust, and then thrust it into the post like before. She wiped her hands on her jeans. "That's that," she said, and went back to look for the finger. Lady William and Macon applied a rudimentary dressing to Jan Johann's hand. Holy Carl brought his trailer forward, and when Jan Johann's legs collapsed beneath him, Huge Hans carried him out and put him into it. Jan Johann was sobbing, so much that he could hardly breathe. And there was a large, brown, evil-smelling stain at the seat of his pants. "Remember, it's your turn to decide next," Otto shouted to cheer him up, even though there was no one left to be next. Unless he was thinking about Pierre Anton. Holy Carl got his pedals going, and the trailer drew briskly away, with the whimpering Jan Johan. Chapter 18. Dun dun dun. Okay, well, I just knocked a bunch of weed on the floor.